The eviction notice was taped crooked on the front door, fluttering in the morning breeze like it had somewhere else to be. I stood there in my robe, barefoot on the cold concrete, staring at my name in bold letters like it didn't belong to me, like this house hadn't held my laughter, my tears, my prayers, like I hadn't signed my future away inside these walls. "Mommy?" My daughter Kayla called from the bedroom. Her voice was small, sleepy, trusting. I peeled the paper off the door slowly, hands shaking so hard I almost ripped it in half. Eviction. Final notice, 7 days. I felt the blood rush out of my face, that hollow underwater feeling where sound fades and your heartbeat gets too loud. He was gone, his side of the closet empty, his phone disconnected, and now this. I had co-signed those loans because I loved him, because he said it was for us. "Just paperwork, baby," he told me, kissing my forehead like that made it safe. "We're building something." I believed him because belief is easier than doubt when you're in love. I believed him because Black women are taught to hold things together even when the weight gets heavy. I walked into the kitchen and sat down hard in the chair. The counters were cluttered with unopened mail, past due notices, warning letters, promises I didn't have the strength to read anymore. I've been paying what I could, juggling, stretching, telling myself things would turn around, that he'd come through, that love meant patience. Kayla padded in, dragging her blanket. "Why you crying?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. I wiped my face fast and forced a smile that felt like it might crack my skin. "Mommy's okay," I said, "just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was betrayed. I called him again, even though I already knew. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? Come back and fix what you broke? Come back and be the man you pretended to be? I sat there listening to the silence and realized something painful and clear. He'd known this was coming. He'd left me to carry the fallout alone. By noon, the shame settled in, thick, heavy. I didn't tell anyone, not my mama, not my friends. Pride will have you sleeping on hope long after it's expired. I cleaned the house instead, like order might undo disaster. Folded laundry, washed dishes, pretended this was just another Tuesday. That night, after Kayla fell asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, I spread the papers out on the table. Loan agreements, my signature everywhere. His name too, but mine was the one that mattered. Co-signer, joint responsibility, love, legally binding. I remembered every conversation, every reassurance. "I got us. This is temporary. Trust me." I trusted him so deeply I never thought to protect myself. I never imagined love would cost me my home. The knock came 3 days later. The landlord, polite, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I have to move forward." Kayla stood behind me, peeking around my leg. I nodded like I understood, like my world was folding in on itself. We packed what we could fit into trash bags, clothes, shoes, a few toys. I left behind furniture I picked out, memories I couldn't carry. The night we locked the door for the last time, Kayla asked, "When we coming back?" I swallowed so hard my throat burned. "Soon," I lied. The women's shelter smelled like disinfectant and survival. Metal beds, thin blankets, women with eyes that had seen too much. I signed in quietly, head down, dignity folded up small enough to fit in my purse. Kayla curled into my side that first night, whispering, "It's cold." I held her and stared at the ceiling, listening to other women breathe, cry, pray. Love had brought me here. Trust had broken me open. But lying there in the dark, something unfamiliar stirred beneath the fear. Anger. Not loud, not wild, focused. because somewhere between the eviction notice and this shelter bed, I realized something had to change, and whatever came next would not be built on love alone. The first morning in the shelter, I woke up before the sun, like my body didn't trust rest anymore. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the rustle of women shifting in their sleep. Kayla was curled against my side, her small hand fisted in my sweatshirt like if she let go, I might disappear. I lay there staring at the cracked ceiling, counting breaths, trying not to cry. The shelter ran on rules: wake-up times, shower rotations, breakfast lines, structure wrapped around survival. I told myself it was temporary, but the word tasted thin. Temporary didn't feel real when you were brushing your teeth beside strangers who looked just as scared as you were trying not to be. At breakfast, Kayla sat quietly, swinging her legs under the table. She didn't complain about the powdered eggs or the dry toast. That hurt more than if she had. Children shouldn't know how to adapt this fast. I caught a woman across the room watching me, older, sharp-eyed, her hair pulled back tight. She nodded once like she saw me, like she knew. After dropping Kayla at the shelter's daycare room, I went to orientation. A caseworker with tired kindness explained resources, curfews, expectations, job boards, budgeting classes, counseling. I nodded through it all, but my mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he'd smiled when he asked me to co-sign, to how safe I thought I was. The shame came in waves. I felt it when I stood in line for donated clothes, when I filled out forms listing homeless as my current address, when I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman looking back. I wasn't careless. I wasn't lazy. I loved someone who took advantage of my loyalty. Still, the world doesn't ask for context. It just judges outcomes. That afternoon, I checked my email on the shelter computer. More bills, collection notices, my credit score unraveling in real time. I closed my eyes and breathed through the panic rising in my chest. Crying wouldn't pay this off. Wishing wouldn't undo it. If I was going to climb out, I needed a plan, not hope, not love, not forgiveness, a plan. I signed up for the budgeting class the same day. The room was small, the chairs hard, but something about writing numbers down steadied me. Income, expenses, debt. Seeing it all on paper hurt, but it also stripped away the fog. This wasn't a curse, it was math, and math could be learned. At night, Kayla asked questions I wasn't ready for. Why can't we go home? Where's he at? I chose my words carefully, balancing honesty with protection. Mommy made a mistake trusting the wrong person, I said softly, but Mommy's fixing it. She nodded like that was enough. I prayed it would be. Days blurred into routine, job applications in the morning, shelter chores in the afternoon, budgeting class twice a week, counseling once. I started picking up extra shifts at work, closing late, opening early, my body running on fumes. Still, every dollar I earned went into an envelope labeled START. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One evening, as I was folding donated towels, the older woman from breakfast sat beside me. "You won't be here forever," she said matter-of-factly, "but only if you stop trying to save people who won't save you." Her words landed hard because they were true. I thanked her. She smiled like she'd been waiting for me to hear it. I stopped calling him after that, stopped checking his social media, stopped hoping for an apology that would never come. Closure is a luxury. I couldn't afford it. What I could afford was discipline. 3 weeks in, my caseworker pulled me aside. "There may be transitional housing opening up," she said. My heart jumped. "But," she added, "there's a waiting list, and your debt situation could complicate things." That night, I lay awake listening to the shelter breathe again. Kayla slept, peaceful for once. I stared into the dark, calculating numbers in my head, realizing the truth I'd been avoiding. Loving him hadn't just cost me my home. It had left a financial shadow long enough to follow me everywhere, unless I found a way to outrun it. The waiting list felt like another kind of punishment, quiet, invisible, and slow. Every morning I checked in with a caseworker like maybe the rules had changed overnight. They hadn't. "Not yet," she'd say gently, and I'd nod like disappointment wasn't becoming a routine I knew too well. I learned how to make myself small in the shelter, not weak, just unobtrusive. I cleaned without being asked. I followed every rule. I said thank you even when I felt like screaming. Survival has its own etiquette. Kayla adapted faster than I did. She made friends in the daycare room, colored pictures of houses with big windows and smiling stick figures. Sometimes she drew me holding a key. I taped those drawings inside my planner like reminders of what I was working toward. The budgeting class became my anchor. I stopped seeing numbers as accusations and started seeing them as instructions. I learned about snowballing debt, about credit repair, about separating emotion from spending. Love had taught me to blur those lines. Poverty forced me to sharpen them. One afternoon, the instructor asked us to write down our financial boundaries, not goals, boundaries, things we would never do again. My pen hovered before I wrote, "I will never co-sign for anyone again." The sentence felt final, clean, like closing a door that had been open too long. Work intensified. I took every shift I could, even when my feet throbbed and my head ached. I worked nights, slept in short bursts, showed up again. The shelter staff started calling me consistent. That word meant more to me than praise ever had. Consistency was something no one could take from me. Then the call came, not from housing, but from a debt collector. His voice was sharp, rehearsed. "You owe—" I cut him off. "I know," I said, "and I'm working on it." For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I asked for validation letters, payment plans, documentation. He sounded surprised. So was I. That night, I sat on my bunk bed writing out a plan by flashlight. Timelines, milestones, small wins. I didn't think about him anymore. Not really. I thought about systems, steps, exit routes. Love had once made me reckless. Discipline was making me dangerous, in the best way. 2 months in, my caseworker smiled when she saw me. "Your name's moving up," she said. "Your file looks strong." I walked back to my bunk feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Progress isn't loud, it whispers. You have to listen for it. Kayla crawled into my lap that night and asked, "We getting closer?" I kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby," I said, and this time it wasn't a lie. But just as stability started to feel possible, an envelope showed up in my locker at the shelter. No return address. Inside was a copy of a loan statement, highlighted, my balance, my name, and scribbled across the bottom in ink I recognized immediately. "You still owe me." My chest tightened as I folded the paper. He wasn't done, and I realized rebuilding my life meant facing him one last time, not with love, not with anger, but with boundaries he would never be allowed to cross again. I stared at that envelope for a long time before I opened it all the way, like maybe if I moved slow enough the past wouldn't catch up to me. But ink doesn't say just because you wish it would. "You still owe me." 4 words, written with the same lazy confidence he always had when he thought he held the power. My hands went cold, not shaking, steady. That scared me more. I took the paper to my caseworker instead of hiding it like I would have months ago. She read it, lips pressed tight. "This is intimidation," she said, "and it's not okay." Hearing someone else name it snapped something into place. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't bitter. I was responding to a threat. She helped me document everything. Dates, numbers, screenshots. We talked about legal aid, about cease and desist letters, about protecting myself financially and emotionally. It felt strange sitting there talking strategy about a man I once planned a future with, but love doesn't get a vote in survival. That night, Kayla sensed the shift. Kids always do. "Did he call?" she asked quietly as we lay side by side. I hesitated, then chose honesty without fear. "He tried to scare Mommy," I said, "but Mommy's not scared anymore." She nodded and snuggled closer, like she believed me. I made sure I believed me too. A week later, transitional housing opened up. It wasn't perfect, a small apartment in a quiet complex with thin walls and furniture that had lived other lives before us, but it had a door that locked, a kitchen that was ours, a place where Kayla could leave her shoes by the door without asking permission. I cried when they handed me the keys, not loud, just enough to feel it. Moving in didn't erase the debt. Bills followed us like shadows, but shadows mean there's light somewhere. I set up payment plans. I tracked every expense. I cooked at home. I said no to things that didn't serve the plan. Discipline wasn't glamorous, but it was working. Then he showed up. I was taking out the trash when I heard my name the way he used to say it, soft, familiar, dangerous. I froze. He stood by the parking lot, hands in his pockets, smiling like nothing had ever happened, like he hadn't walked away while my world collapsed. "You look tired," he said. "We should talk." I didn't step closer, didn't raise my voice. "You need to leave," I said calmly. He laughed. "You can't just walk away from what you owe." I looked him in the eye for the first time in months and felt nothing. No love, no fear, just clarity. "You don't own me," I said, "and you don't get access to my life anymore." His smile slipped, just for a second. Enough. That night, I filed a report, documented the encounter, added it to the file. Boundaries aren't just spoken, they're enforced. Still, as I locked the door behind us and tucked Kayla to bed, I felt it creeping in, the awareness that freedom sometimes provokes people who benefited from your silence, that standing up can make you a target. Because I knew he wasn't used to hearing no, and I had a feeling the next move wouldn't be as easy to ignore. The first week in transitional housing, I slept with the lights on. Not because the apartment felt unsafe, but because peace felt unfamiliar. My body was so used to bracing for impact that stillness made me restless. Every sound, a neighbor's door, footsteps in the hallway, a car pulling in late, snapped my eyes open. Trauma doesn't ask permission before it overstays its welcome. Kayla, on the other hand, slept like a child who finally believed tomorrow was real. She spread out on the bed like she owned the place, arms wide, hair fanned across the pillow. Watching her breathe slow and steady reminded me why I couldn't afford to fold. Not now, not ever again. I tightened my routines. Mornings started at 5. Coffee, notebook, numbers. I tracked every dollar like it was a promise I intended to keep. Rent, utilities, transportation, food, debt. I color-coded categories because seeing progress mattered. Control mattered. Love had once convinced me to trust without verification. Discipline taught me to verify everything, including myself. At work, my manager noticed the change before I did. "You're sharper," she said one afternoon as we closed up, "more focused." I smiled but didn't explain. Focus is what happens when distractions are stripped away. I didn't have room for confusion anymore. Everything in my life either moved me forward or got left behind. The legal aid appointment came 2 weeks after he showed up at the apartment complex. I sat across from a woman who spoke calmly, clearly, like fear wasn't something she entertained. We went through the loans, the intimidation, the note, the parking lot encounter. She nodded, taking notes, not flinching once. "You're not obligated to protect him," she said. "You're obligated to protect yourself." That sentence followed me home. I sent the cease and desist letter the next day. Certified mail, signature required. My hands shook when I dropped it off, but my spine didn't bend. This wasn't a plea, it was a line. He responded exactly how people like him always do, with rage disguised as wounded pride. Text messages flooded in from unknown numbers, accusations, insults, reminders of everything he'd done for me. I saved them all. Silence can be strategic when you're building a case, but silence doesn't stop memory. Some nights, I replayed our early days like a highlight reel I didn't ask for. The way he used to cook breakfast on Sundays, the way he talked about the future like it was already ours. I had to grieve the man I thought he was, not the one he proved himself to be. That grief came in waves, sharp, sudden, inconvenient. I let it come without letting it decide anything. The budgeting class ended, but I kept the binder, added to it, expanded it. I started listening to financial podcasts on my commute, learned about emergency funds, sinking funds, credit utilization. Information stopped feeling overwhelming and started feeling empowering. Nobody had taught me this growing up. Love had never required it. Survival did. Kayla noticed the changes too. "You always writin'," she teased one evening as I balanced the notebook on my knee. "I'm building our future," I told her. She smiled like that made sense. Then the call came, not from him, not from a collector, but from the housing authority. A first-time homebuyer program. I almost laughed, out loud in the kitchen. The idea felt impossible, almost insulting. Me? A homeowner again? With debt still trailing behind me like a shadow? The woman on the phone explained slowly, patiently. Education requirements, savings benchmarks, credit rebuilding timelines. It wasn't a promise, it was a path. Paths matter when you've been lost. I enrolled that same week. Classes on Saturdays, worksheets, long-term planning. I learned the difference between desire and readiness, between wanting stability and earning it. For the first time, home wasn't something I hoped someone would help me keep. It was something I was preparing to claim on my own terms. And that's when the fear came back. Not of him, but of myself. What if I failed again? What if I trusted the wrong thing this time? What if I wasn't built for ownership, for permanence, for peace? Those questions haunted me until one quiet night when Kayla fell asleep on the couch beside me. I looked at her face, relaxed and unguarded, and realized something that cut through every doubt. I wasn't rebuilding for comfort. I was rebuilding for freedom. And freedom doesn't require perfection. It requires persistence. Still, as I closed my notebook and turned off the light, my phone buzzed once more. A single message. "You can't erase me." I didn't respond, but I knew the truth. I wasn't trying to erase him anymore. I was outgrowing him. And people don't always take kindly to being left behind. That message sat on my phone for 3 days before I finally deleted it. Not because it scared me, but because it didn't. And that realization felt heavier than fear ever had. When someone no longer has the power to disturb your peace, their words start sounding like echoes from a room you've already left. Life moved forward, whether he liked it or not. The homebuyer classes were harder than I expected, not because of the material, but because of what it forced me to confront. My habits, my blind spots, the ways I used optimism to avoid preparation. Every lesson felt like a mirror held too close to my face, but instead of flinching, I leaned in. Accountability hurts less than regret. I learned how lenders think, what debt-to-income ratios really mean, why emergency funds aren't optional. I learned how one late payment can haunt you for years and how consistency can slowly resurrect what you thought was dead. Credit isn't about worth, I realized. It's about patterns, and patterns can be changed. I opened a second savings account and labeled it Home. The first deposit was $50. I stared at the receipt longer than I needed to, letting the moment sink in. $50 wasn't a miracle, but it was intentional, and intention builds momentum. Work offered overtime again, and this time I took it without resentment. I wasn't chasing approval or trying to prove anything to anyone. I was investing. Every shift had a purpose. Every tired muscle had a destination. Then something unexpected happened. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon. "There's a supervisory position opening up," she said. "I think you should apply." My first instinct was to say no, to shrink, to assume I wasn't ready. That voice sounded a lot like the woman I used to be, the one who thought love meant lowering herself to be chosen. I applied anyway. The interview was nerve-wracking. Questions about leadership, responsibility, conflict resolution. I spoke honestly about struggle, about discipline, about learning the hard way. I didn't perform strength, I demonstrated it. A week later, they offered me the position. The raise wasn't life-changing, but the signal was. Someone saw me as stable, capable, reliable. I went home and cried in the bathroom so Kayla wouldn't worry. Sometimes joy needs privacy. With the promotion came new challenges, longer hours, harder decisions, more eyes on me. But pressure felt different now. It didn't crush me, it clarified me. Then, almost a year after the eviction, the past tried one last time to knock. I was leaving work when I saw him across the street, leaning against a car that wasn't his. Older, thinner, watching me like he was measuring something he'd lost. He didn't approach, didn't wave, just stood there. For a split second, the old instinct flared, the urge to explain myself, to justify my strength, to show him I was okay. I let it pass. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. Closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from consistency. At home, Kayla was doing homework at the table, humming softly to herself. I kissed the top of her head and sat down with my notebook. The numbers looked different now. Debt shrinking, savings growing, timelines tightening, the impossible slowly becoming probable. That night, I wrote something new at the top of the page. I do not build my future on promises. I build it on proof. I slept with the lights off for the first time since moving in. Peace didn't feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt earned. And as the months stacked up, payment by payment, shift by shift, boundary by boundary, I realized something profound. I wasn't just recovering from losing a home. I was becoming the kind of woman who could never be displaced again. But the real test of that strength was still coming, because the closer I got to qualifying for that mortgage, the more the past seemed determined to remind me what it cost to get here. The closer I got to qualifying for the mortgage, the quieter I became about my plans. Not because I was ashamed, but because I'd learned the difference between privacy and secrecy. Some things grow better when nobody's breathing on them. I kept my head down and my habits tight. Credit utilization dropped. Late payments aged off. My savings crossed numbers I never thought I'd see attached to my name. Every milestone felt small until I looked back and realized how far I'd come from that shelter bed with thin blankets and borrowed hope. The homebuyer counselor smiled at me one Saturday morning and said, "You're almost there." Almost. That word hit different this time. Not fragile, not tempting fate, solid. Then the past found another crack. It came disguised as paperwork. A notice arrived in the mail with a familiar logo, one of the loans I had co-signed years ago. I opened it calmly, expecting routine information. Instead, my stomach dropped. The balance had spiked. Fees, penalties, missed payments I hadn't been notified about. My name was still there, legally bound to a mess I hadn't touched in years. I called immediately, sat on hold, waited. When the representative came back on the line, her voice was apologetic but firm. "Your co-signer defaulted again," she said. "We're required to report it." Again. I felt the old anger try to rise, hot and reckless, but I forced it down. Emotion would not fix this. Information might. I pulled every document I had, the cease and desist, the payment records, the letters. I contacted legal aid again. This time, I didn't ask what to do. I told them what I needed. I want my name removed, I said, permanently. It took weeks, calls, emails, escalations, proof of harassment, proof of non-cooperation, proof that I had tried to resolve this in good faith long before now. Exhausting work layered on top of already full days, but I didn't break stride. Kayla noticed my intensity. "Is something wrong again?" she asked one night as I tucked her in. I chose truth without panic. "Someone tried to pull Mommy backward," I said, "but I'm not going." That's when she said something that stayed with me. "You always go forward," she whispered. The lender finally agreed to a release. Conditional, complicated, but real. My name would come off after a final settlement payment. The amount wasn't small. It would slow my home timeline, but it would free me completely. I didn't hesitate. I paid it. Writing that check hurt more than I expected, not because of the money, but because of what it represented, the last tie, the final cost of loving someone who didn't love me responsibly. I cried afterward, quietly, alone. Then I slept better than I had in years. The counselor updated my file. "This actually strengthens your profile," she said. "Clean break, no loose ends." I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since the day I signed those papers. A month later, I got the email. Pre-approved. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Kayla jumped around the room when I told her, chanting, "We get in the house! We get in the house!" I laughed so hard my chest hurt. But pre-approval isn't keys. It's permission to try. And trying means risk. As we started touring houses, small ones, modest ones, hopeful ones, I felt something unexpected creep in beside the excitement. Fear. Not a failure, but of finally having something no one else could take from me. Because once you know what it feels like to lose everything, you understand how much courage it takes to reach for permanency again. House hunting sounded romantic when people talked about it. Weekend showings, dream kitchens, fresh starts. In reality, it was a quiet, emotional obstacle course I hadn't trained for. Every front door we walked through carried ghosts of what I'd lost, the house that wasn't mine anymore, the life I'd built on borrowed stability, the way eviction papers had once flapped in the wind like a warning I ignored. I learned to breathe through it. The first house smelled like new paint and optimism. 2 bedrooms, small yard. I stood in the doorway, imagining Kayla's backpack by the door, my keys on the hook, routines that didn't feel borrowed. The realtor smiled, waiting for my reaction. I nodded politely. My chest stayed tight. The second house had a cracked driveway and a kitchen smaller than the shelter's dining room. Still, Kayla twirled through it like it was a palace. "This could be my room," she said, pointing at a space barely big enough for a twin bed. Her joy startled me. I realized she wasn't carrying my fear, she was carrying possibility. I didn't rush anything. I asked questions, inspected details, read disclosures like contracts mattered, because they did. Love had taught me to overlook red flags. Ownership demanded I study them. At night, doubt came for me dressed as responsibility. Are you moving too fast? What if something breaks? What if the safety disappears again? I countered it with facts, numbers, buffers, emergency plans. Discipline doesn't eliminate fear. It gives you a language stronger than it. Then we saw the house. It wasn't perfect. It had creaky floors and a backyard that needed work, but the light poured into the living room like it belonged there. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, feeling something settle in my chest. Not excitement, recognition. This one didn't promise me anything. It just waited. I made an offer that night. Conservative, careful, grounded in reality. When the realtor called the next day, her voice was bright. "They accepted," she said. I sat down on the edge of the couch and closed my eyes. Kayla screamed when I told her, running laps around the apartment like she'd already moved in. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Joy is messy when you haven't had it in a while. The inspection period tested me. Every creak sounded like a warning. Every note from the inspector felt personal. Roof repairs, electrical updates, negotiations. I didn't freeze. I didn't fold. I asked for credits. I walked through contingencies. I remembered who I'd become. The lender requested one more document, then another, then another. Pay stubs, bank statements, explanations for past late payments, including the eviction. Writing that letter cracked something open in me. I told the truth without shame. About love, about loss, about learning, about discipline. Days passed, then weeks. I checked my email too often, reread messages, tried not to project disaster onto silence. Kayla asked every morning, "Any news?" I'd smile and say, "Not yet." One afternoon, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. The lender's number. My heart thudded so hard I had to sit down in my car before answering. "Danielle," she said, "I just need to clarify one thing." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I listened as she spoke, my mind racing ahead of her words, bracing for the past to reach up one more time and pull me backward. Because I knew this: when you're this close to peace, the smallest detail can decide everything. And I didn't know yet whether this call was about to unlock my future or remind me how fragile almost can be. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands started to ache, listening to the lender breathe on the other end of the line like she was choosing her words carefully. That pause felt louder than any rejection ever could. I stared straight ahead through the windshield, watching people walk past my car with groceries, coffee, normal lives, wondering if mine was about to stall right at the finish line. She cleared her throat. "We just need clarification on one item from your explanation letter," she said. One item. My heart was pounding, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "Okay," I said. "What do you need?" She asked about the eviction, the timeline, whether there were any outstanding judgments tied to it. I explained again, slowly, clearly, how the eviction happened, how it was connected to co-signed debt, how I had since settled, repaired, rebuilt. I didn't rush. I didn't over-explain. I spoke like a woman who knew her story and wasn't afraid of it. "Thank you," she said. "That helps." Then she said the words that nearly knocked the breath out of me. At this point, everything else looked solid. Solid. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes, letting that word sink in. Solid meant no surprises. Solid meant the ground wasn't shifting under my feet anymore. Solid meant I had done the work. "We'll move this to final underwriting," she continued. "You should hear back soon." Soon. I hung up and sat there for a long time, heart still racing, a slow smile spreading across my face before I could stop it. I called Kayla next, even though she was still at school. I couldn't wait. "We're close," I whispered. She squealed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I knew it," she shouted. That night, I barely slept, not from fear, from anticipation. I kept imagining keys in my hand, a door that belonged to us, a place where no one could tape anything to it and tell me to leave. The next few days crawled by. I stayed busy on purpose, extra shifts, cleaning the apartment, packing boxes slowly, just in case. I didn't want to jinx it, but I also didn't want to be unprepared. Hope is careful when it's been burned before. Then the email came. Clear to close. I read it 3 times before it registered. Clear to close. I screamed out loud in the kitchen. Kayla dropped her spoon and started screaming too before she knew why. I picked her up and spun her around until we were both dizzy and laughing. Clear to close didn't mean it was done. It meant one last step. Signatures, paperwork, a date circled on the calendar like a promise I had earned. But even in the celebration, a strange emotion crept in. Grief. Not for him, not for the house I lost, but for the woman I used to be, the one who thought love required sacrificing her safety, the one who didn't know how strong she actually was. I sat on the couch that night, Kayla asleep beside me, and let myself mourn her quietly. Then I let her go, because the woman I was becoming didn't need to be rescued. She had learned how to build. And in just a few days, when I walked into that closing office, I wouldn't just be signing papers. I'd be closing the door on the past. Still, as I checked my phone one last time before bed, a familiar name flashed on the screen, a missed call I hadn't expected to see again. My chest tightened, because I knew exactly who it was, and I knew before this chapter ended, I would have to decide whether silence was still enough. I stared at the missed call until the screen went dark. His name didn't scare me anymore, but it still carried weight, like an old bruise you don't feel until someone presses it. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I sat the phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of tea, hands steady, breathing slow. Silence wasn't avoidance now. It was a boundary. He tried again the next morning, voicemail this time. "Danielle, I heard you're buying a house," he said, voice soft, almost nostalgic. "We should talk before you make another mistake." Another mistake. I deleted the message without listening again. People who benefit from your chaos always get nervous when they see you stabilizing. His timing told me everything I needed to know. Closing day arrived gray and quiet. No fanfare, no audience, just me, Kayla, and a folder thick with documents that represented years of discipline compressed into ink and paper. The closing office smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. Ordinary. That felt right. I signed my name over and over again, each signature a small act of reclamation. No cosigner, no shared liability, no one else's promises attached, just me. When they slid the final document across the table, the one with my name alone on the deed, my throat tightened. "Congratulations," the agent said, smiling. I didn't cry right away. I picked up the keys first. They were heavier than I expected, cool against my palm. Kayla squeezed my hand like she understood exactly what they meant. On the drive to the house, my phone buzzed again. His name, persistent, desperate. I pulled over, stared at the screen, and made a decision I'd been avoiding. I answered. "What do you want?" I asked, voice calm. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I just wanted to say, I didn't think you'd actually pull it off." I smiled, not out of spite, but clarity. "That's because you never saw me," I said. "You only saw what you could take." He tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Danielle, you don't have to act like—" "I'm not acting," I interrupted gently. "I'm done." And I hung up. No argument, no explanation, no emotional labor. Some endings don't need closure, they need finality. We pulled up to the house a few minutes later. Small, solid, ours. Kayla jumped out of the car before I could stop her, racing to the door like it might disappear if she waited too long. I unlocked it slowly, deliberately, and stepped inside. The rooms echoed, empty, waiting. That first night, we sat on the living room floor eating takeout, laughing at nothing, exhausted in the best way. I lay awake later listening to the quiet, realizing no one could take this from me. Not legally, not emotionally, Not ever again. But as peace settled in, another thought followed, sharp and unexpected. Owning a home didn't erase what I had survived. It confirmed it. And I knew the final part of this journey wouldn't be about celebration alone. It would be about understanding who I had become because of the cost. The first morning in the house felt unreal, like I'd woken up inside someone else's life. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows, settling softly on bare walls and unopened boxes. I lay there for a moment, listening, not for danger, not for footsteps, not for the hum of shared anxiety, just quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. Kayla padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. "This is really ours?" she asked, like she still needed confirmation. I smiled and nodded, every bit of it. She grinned wide, then ran off to claim her room again, this time without asking permission. I brewed coffee in my own kitchen and leaned against the counter, letting the weight of ownership sink into my bones. Not pride, peace. The deep, steady kind that comes from knowing no one could undo this with a phone call or a signature. I didn't owe anyone access to my life anymore. Over the next few days, I moved slowly on purpose, unpacking one box at a time, hanging curtains, learning the sounds of the house. Each creak became familiar instead of threatening. Each bill that arrived got opened immediately, handled without dread. Fear doesn't survive in light. Friends stopped by, family too. Some congratulated me with genuine joy, others with surprise they didn't bother to hide. I let both pass. This wasn't a performance. It was a boundary made visible. The homebuyer counselor called to officially close my file. "You did this the right way," she said. "Not fast, not flashy, right." I thanked her and hung up, realizing I didn't need external validation the way I once did. The work spoke for itself. That night, I found the notebook, the one that had followed me from shelter beds to kitchen tables. I flipped through pages filled with numbers, plans, fear, determination. On the last blank page, I wrote, "Love without responsibility is not love. It's risk disguised as hope." I wasn't bitter when I wrote it. I was clear. Later, as Kayla slept in her room surrounded by half-unpacked toys, I stood in the hallway and felt something release. The hypervigilance, the constant bracing. Survival mode doesn't turn off overnight, but it loosens when it realizes it's no longer needed. I thought about him once, briefly, not with anger, not even with sadness, just acknowledgement. He had been a chapter, a costly one, but chapters end so the story can move forward. Owning this house didn't make me invincible, it made me intentional. I knew now how quickly life could change and how powerfully discipline could rebuild what love alone couldn't protect. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt gratitude, not for the pain, but for the strength it uncovered. Gratitude for the woman who didn't give up when it would have been easier to disappear. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and keep living, paying bills, making dinners, building stability one ordinary day at a time. In that ordinariness, I finally understood the real reward. I wasn't just housed, I was home. But before I could fully rest in that truth, I knew one thing remained, the final reckoning with my own past choices, not to punish myself, but to forgive the woman who didn't yet know how strong she could become. I didn't forgive myself all at once. Forgiveness came in pieces, quiet, unremarkable moments that didn't look like healing until I noticed the weight lifting. It came the first time I paid the mortgage without my stomach tightening. It came when I signed Kayla up for school using our new address and didn't hesitate. It came when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and didn't see shame staring back at me. I saw a woman who learned. That mattered. One evening, a few weeks after we moved in, I sat alone on the living room floor with my back against the couch, the house finally filled with furniture and breath and routine. The notebook rested in my lap, worn soft from survival. I reread early entries, fear written in rushed handwriting, desperation hidden inside careful planning, hope scribbled small so it wouldn't jinx anything. I didn't judge that woman. I thanked her. She had loved deeply because she believed in partnership. She had trusted because she wanted permanence. Those weren't flaws. They were strengths that hadn't yet learned boundaries. And instead of punishing myself for that, I let compassion settle where blame used to live. Kayla came and sat beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You happy, Mommy?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Happiness isn't fireworks anymore. It's steadier than that, quieter. "I'm peaceful," I said, "and that's better." She nodded like she understood more than she should at her age, then ran off to her room. I stayed there a while longer, listening to the house hum, refrigerator, pipes, distant traffic. Proof of life, proof of normalcy, proof of safety. I never heard from him again, not because he changed, but because access expired. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop bleeding for people who don't know how to love responsibly, they eventually move on to easier targets. Silence, I learned, isn't weakness, it's resolution. Life didn't become perfect. Repairs came up, unexpected expenses, tired days, but none of it shook me the way instability once had. I had systems now, cushions, knowledge. I had earned the ability to handle what came next. Sometimes when I pulled into the driveway after work, I sat in the car for a moment before going inside, not because I was afraid, but because I was grateful. Grateful that my daughter would never have to wonder where she'd sleep. Grateful that my name on that deed didn't come with conditions. Grateful that love no longer required me to sacrifice my safety. I learned something this journey didn't teach me gently, but it taught me thoroughly. Love should never cost you your home. Love should never require you to disappear. Love should never ask you to carry consequences someone else refuses to face. What I built afterward wasn't just a house. It was discernment. It was discipline. It was dignity. And if my story reaches someone standing where I once stood, afraid to say no, afraid to walk away, afraid to start over, I want them to know this. You are not weak for believing, but you are powerful when you protect yourself. I didn't rise because someone saved me. I rose because I decided I was worth saving. And every night, when I lock my door and turn off the lights, I don't feel lucky. I feel anchored. I feel whole. I feel home. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.